Well, hey.
And then,
Hey, welcome back to Talking Branches. Today, we've switched places. You preach today, so I'm going to interview you, get some of your thoughts, and give you an opportunity to kind of expand on what you said this morning. I really enjoyed your message.
thank you.
Yeah, it was good. It was really challenging even for me, and I think for probably everyone who was listening.
For me too, so
For
don't
you,
worry.
it was
I don't have it all
challenging.
figured out,
Oh,
believe
for
it or
sure.
not.
For sure. For sure. I did want to start off, though. You keep talking about mushrooms and how much you like to pick them. And you talk about how they're for culinary uses.
It's good that you make that distinction.
I think it's really important.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why don't you share with us what your favorite mushroom recipe is?
Man, it's hard to pick just one, believe it or not.
Well.
It really depends on the mushroom, but I would say generally, you can't go wrong just like sauteing them in butter and garlic and salt and pepper, and you just do like a nice saute, cook the moisture out, and then you put it on a steak, or you can throw it in like a pasta sauce, or you can put it in eggs. There's lots of options when you just do that. The other day though, I've been trying to find new things because, I mean, butter's not really like that great for you,
right?
Especially in like the amount that I use. It tastes delicious, but it's not good. I actually poached some the other day in butter. Like I did like a hot butter sauce with cream, and I like poached these ones that came out amazing, but those were super unhealthy. But then I made a chanterelle mushroom pate, where I took like bacon and I sauteed a bunch of onions, garlic, mushrooms, thyme, rosemary, and then I did some bacon in it, and then I added some fresh like Anaheim peppers, and then I blended it in the blender with some tomato sauce, which is weird, but it tasted delicious. It was like a dip that was pretty phenomenal.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
So, the skills that you exhibited recently on the Great Ranches baking show, they're just the tip of the iceberg.
Oh, you have no idea. Like we're getting into some deep stuff here.
I'm actually really hungry right now, so let's get into this so we can go eat lunch. Today you talked about unity. You talked about the importance of us being together. Your shirt's kind of shows us that, and it was obvious just in the way that you presented the content today that you're super passionate about unity, especially as it applies to those of us who are Jesus followers, those of us who call ourselves Christians. I just wanted to ask, share a little bit about what your concern is. What will happen if we don't get this oneness, this togetherness as a church right? What is your concern if we don't get it right?
Man, well, there's a lot there. But I think the main concern would be, I guess if we don't have unity as a body, then like kind of what do we have? As far as like if we're gonna show people that we are serious about our faith, and we fail to be one, then what do we have if we're failing in that? As far as to like show other people like, hey, we're serious about this. This is something that's important. We're not just Christians because we were born into a Christian family, or because we're Republicans or Democrats, or we're born in this geographical region or even this country. If we're not going to take seriously what Jesus requires of us, then like what do we have? And if we fail to do that, I think we fail massively. It's obviously, like we talked about today, it's not easy. It's very difficult to even get there. And it's something you have to remind yourself every day, because like I said, I don't have this figured out. I didn't mention in my message today, but I got on Twitter a couple times this week, which I shouldn't have. Again, I don't have the Twitter app anymore. I have to get on there and log in. And I did, and I started seeing things that I get fired up about. I'm like, man, this is important, and I'll comment on something, and then I get to wait to see how many negative comments I get. And if you're in the Twitter world ever, it's always like, you try not to get ratioed, where more comments than likes. So you kind of start gauging your comments versus likes, like, okay, these people are agreeing with what I'm saying, or these people are arguing with what I'm saying. And I start getting caught up in that kind of realm, and it's a dangerous road to go down, and especially easy right now. And then when you start in Twitter right now, man, it's a hotbed of just Christians going at each other, even with some of my favorite people, my favorite pastors, to see they get kind of blown up with these people from either side. Well, you can't possibly vote for Trump and still be a Christian, or you can't possibly vote for Biden and still be a Christian. And it's just all this going back and forth, and it's nasty.
But isn't having an opinion and having a voice in our country, isn't that important? And are you saying that that's not important? Are you saying that we should shut up? Or like, what do you, because I mean, I'm asking that question. I think I know your answer, but I think it's important to highlight, like, or is that what you're saying?
No, I think having an opinion is something we're obviously entitled to. We can have an opinion. We can have things we're very passionate about for right reasons, whether it's stuff that you've experienced or you've just been a part of. So you just kind of know this area. I mean, I have friends that work in certain fields where they're very close, to political issues. Right. And I like talking to them, even though I don't agree necessarily, but to hear their side of things helps a lot, because, I mean, the political realm there's so much to it. There's so much that we don't understand, that we don't hear both sides. And when we just watch the news, which the news isn't really even news anymore, they tell you what to think of the news that they're giving you oftentimes. So you don't get to just hear an unbiased article. You got to see what to think of it already. And so when we start going that route, we can miss out really on the two-sided, part of the equation. So absolutely, we should have an opinion, but I think ultimately social media, arguing with people that you've never met before and never will meet, is a terrible forum for that. Because I think we don't give each other the time of day. We don't get to explain. You can't explain in 240 characters, like on Twitter, you can't explain fully your point of view. Right. And oftentimes people just throw something out there and then they just get attacked one way or the other. They get supported, and no one really ends up changing their mind. Nobody ends up like growing from the conversation. Wow. And really, I mean, nobody has it figured out either, the social media dilemma. I mean, we're so new to this world of it. We don't know how it affects people. We've seen really that it doesn't affect arguments. Like, no one's getting proved right or wrong on Twitter. No one's signing on Twitter one day and changing their views, even though they're going to get 100 people shouting at them how they should vote or how they should believe. Nobody's changing their mind on there.
Well, and in fact, the data often shows that our biases are just confirmed.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
On social media.
Absolutely.
You compared social media and just the conversation, quote unquote, that happens on there to gathering a group of your friends with a megaphone and shouting your statement from a stage in front of all these people and then walking away without any opportunity for conversation. Yeah. Which, I mean, when I think about that, and kind of even in light of what you just kind of walked through, I think of if we're going to, well, not if, when we disagree, especially as Christians, it should be in the midst of the willingness to have a conversation about that disagreement. And then remember, like you said, if we're not one, then our message gets, then what do we have? Right. So knowing that we are united around Jesus first, and then all of the other stuff. But all of the other stuff, we may disagree, but we ought to be willing to participate in a conversation about it that's more than just 240 characters. Right. More than just shouting from the stage and letting it just sit with no opportunity to converse about it.
Right. Yeah, I think it's so vital that we, when we make statements that are in any way, which pretty much anything could be political, or, there's two sides to like everything. I don't know, if you remember back to the beginning of COVID, it seems like everybody was kind of rallied around for like less than a week. But it was really cool to see. I was like, man, this is amazing. The United States has something to get like behind. We can all be on the same page about this. And then suddenly it becomes like this politicized thing where it's like, oh, if you believe this or you believe this, and now it's like party lines have been drawn, and like it's just crazy. So whenever we say something, especially on social media, we have to be prepared. If we're going to do it right, we have to be prepared to have follow-up conversations to address everybody's questions or concerns. But then also keep in mind, and I didn't mention this morning, that there's a contingency of people who are going to read that aren't going to say anything. and then you never get a chance to address. You don't know the person that might have been the tip of the iceberg. They may have been reading contentious stuff on social media all day, and then they see yours, and they're like, well, that person's a person of influence, or I know that person's a Christian, and they're saying this, and I'm just done. And then they hit that unfollow button or unfriend button, or they just even have this in their mind about you, that person, is a piece of garbage, or they believe that, and then they kind of put this label on you, and you're stuck with that, and you may never even know it. Yeah, you see them at the grocery store, 3 weeks later, and you're wondering why they're like side-eyeing you, and you don't even realize that, well, something you said, kind of offended them. And it's not that you can't say,
right.
I'm not even saying that, I'm not even advocating that you're like a moderate, that you get off of one end of the extreme or whatever. I think that's oftentimes where a lot of people will end up landing, somewhere close to the middle at least. It's not even just that. It's about treating people that you're interacting or disagreeing with respect, and them walking away from the conversation like understanding, not that they beat you or you beat them, but that this person genuinely cares about me.
You said something else that I really appreciated too, and was challenging for me. You said if somebody walks away from a disagreement with you and their takeaway is, oh, that person's a Democrat, oh, that person's a Republican, oh, that person is a anti-masker or whatever, and they don't walk away realizing or recognizing that person loves Jesus, then we've done something wrong. And I think it's that reprioritization of, I'm a Jesus follower first, and what message do I want my life to echo through the interactions and the relationships that I have? The message I want to echo is that Jesus is the solution. Jesus is the hope of the world. And I thought that was such a good contextualization of what you were saying. Like, when we disagree, what people should walk away from that disagreement, that conversation with, is that person loves Jesus, and that person loves people and loves me. So I thought that was really good.
Yeah.
One of the other things I wanted to bring up too is you compared the tension between Republicans and Democrats to the tension between Jews and Gentiles, kind of in Jesus' time. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. When I was like coming up with a message, I was like, well, I don't know if this fits. I think I even talked to you about it. I'm like, does this fit right? And the more I looked into it, I think the more and more it made sense, because at that time Paul was talking to Jews and Gentiles within a church, assuming those people are going to church because, or what they called church back then, because they believed in the death and resurrection of Jesus. Maybe some of them even knew people. Right. Yeah. And so at that time, a Jew and a Gentile their lives would have looked completely different in the way they conducted their lives on a daily basis. So much different. The things that they eat, the ceremonies, the rituals, everything would have looked completely different. Physically, there would have been differences.
The God they worshipped.
Well, the God they worshipped would have been the same.
But before that.
Sure, before that, yeah, they had a far different past.
Yep.
And in fact, what they did and what they said probably would have repulsed each other. Definitely would have repulsed each other if you look at Jews and Samaritans and Jews and pagans and how they interacted before that. So to bring them in the same room was already like kind of a crazy idea that they would even be there. And then the same thing too. I talked about Democrats, Republicans, as they relate to Jews and Gentiles, and slaves versus frees, women versus men. And so there's some of that too. Like, they're all in part of this, unity in Christ. That was bringing these groups that didn't always hang out or were seen on an equal plane kind of together. But like I said, the more I looked into that, I think the more it made sense with the Republican-Democrat thing, because like I said, I think Republicans and Democrats, they have essentially the same vision in mind, or what they have the similar ideals, where they want the best for the country. They want people to be able to thrive. They want people to be the best versions of themselves. We all kind of want the same thing, peace. We all kind of want that. We just have different ways of going about it. And just like that, the Jews and the Gentiles, they wanted Jesus. They wanted, a lot of them would have been maybe friends with or had met people that had known Jesus physically, or they met Paul or Peter, different people that literally did life with Jesus, and they're like, this is incredible. Like, that's crazy news. That's to even, like I said, to even bring them into the same room would have been crazy. And so here they are, with obvious disagreements in the way they should conduct their lives, but also something so unifying together that kind of put all that to rest and kind of made it not really, matter as much. And I think the same is true for Republicans and Democrats or whatever political leanings you have. If we're going to, call ourselves Christians, Jesus followers, believing in the death and resurrection, even though it's 2,000 years later, like the same is true today as it was 2,000 years ago. And so we have to be able to put aside those different ideals, and doesn't mean you can't have a political opinion or a political leaning, but we have to know that ultimately Christ crucified and risen is like a unifying thing.
That's what we gather around.
Right.
Yeah, regardless of all the other stuff. So a lot of this message was about disagreeing, and a lot of it, most of it, directed towards how those who are Jesus followers should disagree. You said Christians should be the best at disagreeing. And so how do two people who disagree about something they're maybe both passionate about, how do they point each other back to Jesus? What does it look like for you and me to disagree, and at the end of the disagreement or the conversation, point each other back to Christ?
I've actually had the privilege of, and maybe it's just because I'm handling it better in light of all this and me being a pastor this election cycle when I wasn't last time, I've had a few disagreements with some good friends that are in the faith, and I've been able to, at the end of them, conduct them pretty civilly, even though we get excited about it.
Sure.
And disagree. I actually find some of that discussion to be the best kind when you're close to somebody who you disagree with, and you can really go at them hard. You can even yell a little bit. If you have someone on the other side who's also a yeller, you don't want to yell at someone who doesn't yell, because then you just feel like a jerk. But to just go back and forth and beat that up, but at the end just say, hey, we value you guys, and literally say this, and we got to say this, hey, no matter what, like, it doesn't matter. And then even having a follow-up text after that saying, hey, I really enjoyed our discussion tonight. I just want you to know that I care about you.
Yeah.
And that's difficult to do, but it's so necessary. Because if they leave and they're like, man, that was awkward, I don't know if I'm welcome in their house anymore. And especially, I have to be especially careful because I'm a pastor, and having people in my home is something we do often. But if they feel like they can't be welcome there, or that somehow they got kind of ganged up on because the majority of the people there were of one political persuasion and they weren't, that can be a pretty bad thing. And I think just reminding yourself during the conversation, or reminding them, hey, regardless of what we say here, or maybe I'm not even willing or ready to go and talk about this issue because I'm going to get too fired up about it. And setting those boundaries before you even get into those discussions may be a necessary thing. But I think while unity takes two people, the other person who's a Christian who thinks differently than you may not be really aware of the message I had today, or that portion of it. They might get too fired up about it. So that may mean that the unity isn't like a 50-50 split where they meet you halfway and you guys can just kind of agree to disagree at the end of the day and love each other at the end of the day. You might have to go 70 or 80% and meet them like where they're at. It may take even more work. So just being prepared to even do that.
Yeah.
And knowing that, hey, we can still have differences, we can still have disagreements, we can still have discussions, but at the end of the day, we have to agree to be unified around Christ, because that's what really matters.
Yeah, and even as you talked about what that looks like and just painted that picture for us, which I think was really helpful, what I heard and what I was just thinking about as you were saying it is that unity requires humility.
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
can't be unified. You can't get to that place where you send that text or you look at the person and say, I love you more than your opinion, or even more than my opinion. You don't get there without humility. And I also heard there has to be a willingness in both parties to forgive and to repent. Because we may say something in our disagreement, that is hurtful, And so we need to repent of that, be willing to, and we also need to be willing to forgive.
Yeah.
And just know and remind each other, man, you're more valuable to me than even my own opinion.
Right.
And that Christ and the unity of the church, what God's called us to do and be in our world is paramount over
Right.
anything else.
Absolutely. And I think you might find in your discussions as you go out that there might be people that are inside the faith that just you can't even have those disagreements with. They might not be ready for it. And you got to respect that. You got to know, hey, last time I had this, it went south. And like, hey, I'm just going to, around you, you may not tell them this, but just tell yourself, tell your spouse this. Like around them, we're just not going to talk politics or talk whatever it is. Because I was talking to someone today about this. They're like, hey, this isn't even me politically, but your message spoke to me because like I just have family drama all the time, and they are Christians, but we just don't get along. We don't see eye to eye on everything. And I think we got to think back pre-COVID, pre-2020, and say like people were disagreeing long before any of this happened, and there will always be grounds for people to have differing opinions on that we have to work through. So this isn't just a 2020 thing. This is like an all the time thing. But thankfully, the message that Jesus, of Jesus Christ crucified and resurrected, like that supersedes everything always and throughout history and will always. So despite whatever disagreements we come to, it's always the answer is like there.
It always has been, and it always will be.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Well, last question just to wrap up today. What happens on Tuesday if our candidate doesn't win?
Yeah.
What happens?
There'll be some tears shed and some Facebook posts made. But what needs to happen is us realizing, hey, this isn't the end of the world. We're going to be okay. Life goes on. Jesus has superseded tragedy, if you want to call a political, an election result a tragedy. The fact that we even get to vote is incredible. So like, that's cool. We can look to that. Christ is still sovereign, and the church blew up under intense persecution from every side, from the Jews, from the Romans. Like I said today, in crazy political time, in a nation that wasn't even sovereign in and of itself, as a conquered nation, it blew up through intense persecution and would eventually become the main religion of the Roman Empire, the very one that persecuted it for years, fed people to lions and gladiators and all that kind of stuff. It just prevailed, and it always will. I mean, God's still good despite whatever happens on Tuesday. And we got to figure out what we're going to do for the next 4 years, and hopefully that's be unified around a common goal. That's Jesus.
That's good. That's good. Thanks for that encouragement and that challenge. Thanks for speaking today and for sharing your heart. Thanks for watching. For those of you who are watching, we hope this was challenging, encouraging, and inspiring for you. Until next week, we'll see you then.